The autumn wind whipped down the glass towers of the financial district, rattling umbrellas and scattering newspapers, but I hardly noticed. I was walking into Nova Technologies' headquarters, a skyscraper that was mine in every sense of the word, though no one in my family knew that truth. To them, I was still Daniel Barrett, the struggling programmer, 32 years old and scraping by in a small apartment. They had no idea that under the name James Morrison, I had built the fastest-growing tech company in the country, a firm valued at over $4 billion. My secret identity had given me freedom, but now it was about to bring me face-to-face with betrayal, closer than I ever imagined. Michael, my executive assistant, met me at the private elevator with his usual calm precision. Board meeting moved to 3:00 p.m. The Samsung deal is ready for your signature, he said, handing me a tablet. And sir, your brother's company just filed some new patents. You'll want to see them. My jaw tightened as I stepped into my penthouse office, a sleek space wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city I'd conquered in silence. The patents from my younger brother's startup, Quantum Solutions, were disturbingly familiar. They mirrored abandoned projects from Nova's own research division, projects that had mysteriously vanished 3 months ago during a supposed server malfunction. Pull the breach logs, I instructed, my voice low. Within moments, Michael placed a folder on my desk. The evidence was clear. James Wilson, my father's trusted consultant and longtime family friend, had accessed Nova's Boston servers exactly 12 hours before the malfunction. Wilson had always appeared respectable, but I knew better. His history of quiet corporate espionage, hidden behind polished charm, was no secret to me. And now he had cozied up to my brother, guiding Thomas's company straight into dangerous territory. As I stared at the proof, memories surfaced. My parents had always favored Thomas, the golden child who followed their path into finance. I, the son who refused to join the family firm 5 years ago, was dismissed as a failure. They never knew that in those 5 years, using my mother's maiden name to conceal my identity, I had built an empire of artificial intelligence and quantum computing breakthroughs. The world knew me only as Morrison, the reclusive genius who never gave interviews, while my family mocked my cheap jeans at dinner, unaware they cost more than their designer suits. That afternoon, I turned my attention to Project Oracle, Nova's most advanced artificial intelligence system. It tracked global market trends, uncovered financial fraud, and, more importantly, monitored my family's business dealings. Oracle's analysis confirmed my suspicions. Quantum Solutions was inflating its value with offshore accounts, masking money, laundering behind the glitter of innovation. The irony was bitter. My parents had lectured me endlessly on ethics, yet here they were backing Thomas's company on stolen technology and fraudulent finances. When Michael informed me Wilson had just entered our Boston office using stolen credentials, I allowed myself a small smile. He had no idea the data he was stealing was fake, a carefully crafted honeypot, feeding him misinformation while logging his every move. By the time my father's investment firm announced they were representing Quantum Solutions in a massive funding round, my plan was already in motion. I called it Protocol Omega, a strategy I had prepared the moment I suspected betrayal. Now the time had come to use it. That evening, I drove my battered 10-year-old Honda to my parents' mansion, parking between luxury cars that gleamed beneath the portico. The Barrett family dinner was as predictable as ever. Thomas in his tailored suit, my parents glowing with pride, and family friends listening with admiration as my brother boasted about Quantum's breakthrough algorithms. Wilson stood near the fireplace, pretending calm but clutching his glass too tightly. I played my role, shrugging at Thomas's jabs and sipping wine as my father dismissed me with his usual condescension. All the while, I carried the truth on a secure phone in my pocket. Project Oracle had compiled undeniable evidence of Quantum's fraud and Wilson's espionage. Tonight, the stage was set for exposure. The following morning, as dawn broke across the skyline, I stood in my office ready to pull the final trigger. "Michael," I said, "initiate the last phase of Protocol Omega and get me Walter Stevens from the SEC on a secure line." Within hours, Nova's lawyers filed patent infringement claims. The SEC received anonymous reports of Quantum's money laundering, and Project Oracle began unraveling the company's financial deceptions, one thread at a time. My phone buzzed with frantic messages from my family. Urgent meetings, pleas for loyalty, invitations to talk. I ignored them all. By mid-afternoon, Michael entered with calm efficiency. "They're here," he said. "Your family, Wilson, even Quantum's board. Security has them in the main conference room." I straightened my suit, no longer hiding behind worn jeans. On my desk stood a small frame holding a 5-year-old newspaper clipping. "Nova Technologies revolutionizes industry under mysterious founder." The photo showed an empty chair at a press conference. I touched it briefly. "Time to fill that chair," I murmured. Then I walked into the conference room to face my family, not as Daniel Barrett the disappointment, but as James Morrison, the man who had built everything they had tried to steal. The look on their faces, frozen in shock, was almost worth the years of secrecy. The conference room was silent when I entered, every eye fixed on me as I took the head seat at the table. My father's face flushed red, my mother clutched her pearls, and Thomas looked as though he might collapse into his chair. Wilson, the seasoned pretender, tried to maintain composure, but his grip on his briefcase betrayed nerves. I let the moment hang, savoring the shift in power. "Good afternoon," I said evenly. "Let's talk about quantum solutions, stolen patents, and the real meaning of success." With a tap of my laptop, the wall screens lit up, flooding the room with Project Oracle's findings. Line after line of data scrolled across the glass. Unauthorized server access, offshore transactions, stolen algorithms, falsified test results. Michael moved with quiet precision, handing printed reports to each person at the table. Gasps echoed as they scanned the pages, my mother's sharp intake of breath cutting through the tension. My father, however, tried to stand firm, glaring across the table at me. "Whatever game you're playing, son." "This isn't a game," I cut him off. "This is the record of every theft, every fraud, every deception tied to Quantum Solutions, including your firm's role in laundering money through offshore accounts." Thomas tried to protest, his voice cracking. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "Explain it to the SEC agents waiting downstairs," I interrupted coldly. He sank back pale, the bravado gone. I turned to Wilson, who had been inching toward the edge of his chair. "And you? 12 unauthorized logins from Boston? Stolen credentials? Espionage hidden behind a friendly smile. Would you like to explain, or should we invite the FBI Cybercrimes Division into this room right now?" His silence was answer enough. He stared at his lap, knuckles white. My mother finally found her voice. "Daniel, James, whoever you are, why lie to us all these years?" I held her gaze. "Because I wanted my work judged on its own merit. Not through shortcuts, not through family influence. You wrote me off as a failure, and that gave me freedom. Freedom to build something real. Nova Technologies thrives because we innovate ethically, not because we steal." The screen shifted again, now displaying Nova's legitimate achievements, pioneering patents, market-changing innovations, and initiatives that supported education and charities. Every success hard-earned and clean. The contrast to Quantum's deception was stark. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my father, voice low and seething, said, "You would destroy your own brother's company, our family's reputation." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You destroyed them yourselves. I'm offering a chance to minimize the damage." At my signal, Michael distributed a final set of documents. "These are resignation papers. Sign them, and Quantum Solutions will be quietly absorbed into Nova. The technology returns to its rightful place. Investors get their money back. No scandal, no prison sentences," Wilson bristled. "And if we refuse?" I smiled thinly. "Then Project Oracle releases everything to the authorities. The SEC, the FBI, the press, all of it." The tension stretched until Thomas picked up a pen, his hand trembling as he signed. My father followed reluctantly, rage simmering in his eyes. My mother wept softly as her signature joined theirs. Wilson's hand shook so violently the pen nearly slipped from his grasp. Within 30 minutes the papers were signed, the damage contained, the empire they had tried to build in ashes. "One more thing," I said as they pushed the documents back. "Father, your investment firm's licenses are being reviewed. I suggest retirement before the review concludes." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, looking suddenly older, beaten. Security escorted them out, past the glass walls and back into a city that no longer bowed to their influence. As they left, Thomas paused at the doorway. His voice was quiet, stripped of arrogance. "The algorithms." "They were brilliant. I should have known they weren't Wilson's." I nodded. "They were brilliant because people here worked hard to create them. No shortcuts." Then he was gone. Alone in the conference room, I finally allowed myself a breath. The trap had closed perfectly. Quantum's fraud exposed. Wilson cornered, my family forced to face the truth. Michael stepped forward. "SEC agents are moving in at Quantum now. Project Oracle estimates over 90% recovery on fraudulent investments." I looked out over the city beyond the glass. "Good," I said. "It's time to rebuild from honesty." Later that evening, as twilight painted the skyline, a new message lit up my secure phone. It was from the only person who had known the truth all along, Grandma Barrett, my first and most faithful investor. Her message was simple. "Well done, grandson. Dinner at my house, 7:00 p.m. Wear whatever you want. Even those expensive jeans you pretend are cheap." For the first time that day, I smiled. The empire was secure, the truth revealed. But some victories were measured not in billions or patents, but in the simple warmth of a family dinner where deception had no place. The city seemed quieter that night, as though the storm had finally passed. But victory brought no rest. The fallout was only beginning, and the next weeks would test not only my company but also my own resolve. Quantum Solutions collapsed like a house of cards once the news leaked. Despite my careful negotiations, the SEC still launched its own inquiry, and federal investigators swarmed their offices. Wilson was arrested on charges of corporate espionage, and though he tried to bargain with information against my family, the evidence against him was overwhelming. My father, stripped of credibility, resigned from his firm before regulators could force him out. My mother retreated from public life, ashamed and bewildered. And Thomas disappeared, at least for a time. Rumors swirled of him leaving the country, but I knew my brother too well. He was licking his wounds, plotting, unable to accept that the younger sibling he had dismissed for years had dismantled his empire in a single afternoon. Meanwhile, Nova Technologies entered its brightest era yet. Investors who had been hesitant before now poured in support, seeing us not only as innovators, but as guardians of integrity in an industry riddled with shortcuts and theft. Our offices buzzed with new energy, our engineers free from the fear of being undermined or spied upon. Yet even in triumph, I knew the shadow of betrayal lingered. I carried it with me every day, a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything to people I once trusted. That burden grew heavier one rainy evening, when a familiar figure showed up unannounced at my apartment. It was Thomas. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes tired, but the arrogance was still there, buried beneath exhaustion. I almost didn't let him in, but something in his expression, a mix of pride swallowed by desperation, made me step aside. He didn't sit. He stood near the window, staring out at the city lights. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was brittle. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "It's not about winning. It's about stopping theft. You crossed the line, Thomas." He turned sharply, anger flashing. "I built Quantum from nothing. Do you have any idea the pressure I was under? The investors, the deadlines, the constant comparisons to you once Nova started rising? Wilson gave me a way to stay ahead." I shook my head. "You didn't build anything. You borrowed and stole, and you let him drag you into something that destroyed you." For a moment, he looked as though he might argue again, but instead, his shoulders slumped. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I studied him carefully, seeing not just the rival who had tried to bury me, but the brother I had once played chess with as kids, who had once snuck me candy under the dinner table. "That depends on you," I said. "You can keep running, or you can face what you've done and start over." He laughed bitterly. "Start over? After all this, I'll never get investors again. My name is ruined." I stepped closer. "Then use it as a lesson. Build something small, something honest. It doesn't have to be billions. Just make it yours." He stared at me, eyes narrowing. "You sound just like Grandma." I smiled faintly. She's wiser than both of us. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally, he gave a small nod. Maybe I'll try. He left soon after, vanishing into the rainy night. I didn't know if he meant it, but for the first time I saw a flicker of humility in his eyes. Perhaps defeat had cracked the shell enough for him to change. In the months that followed, Nova flourished beyond what even I had imagined. Our technology transformed industries. Our ethical stance became a beacon, and our employees, once anxious about espionage, worked with renewed purpose. And yet amid the awards, the interviews, the billions in contracts, I found myself drawn less to the boardroom victories and more to the quieter rewards. Mentoring young engineers, supporting scholarships for students who reminded me of myself at their age, and Sunday dinners at Grandma's house where the only algorithms discussed were her recipes. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Michael asked me if I regretted anything. I thought for a long moment before answering. Regret, no, but I've learned something. Success without integrity is failure in disguise. Trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any company. He nodded, understanding more than words could say, and so, life settled into a new rhythm. Nova continued to grow, the past receded, and I carried forward with the scars and lessons of betrayal. But every so often I thought of Thomas somewhere out there, starting over, or perhaps still struggling. I hoped he would find his way, because despite everything, he was still my brother. And in the end, family, like success, is only real when it's built on truth. Years later, the city skyline had changed, glittering with towers that bore the logos of companies born from the innovations Nova had seeded. Our name had become synonymous not just with progress, but with trust, a word rarely associated with technology corporations anymore. Students wrote essays about our journey, and governments sought our counsel on building ethical frameworks for emerging technologies. Yet for all the accolades, I remained cautious. I had learned that every triumph drew new challengers, and every empire carried its own cracks. It was during an international summit in Singapore when I saw him again. Thomas. He was no longer the brash young executive who had once schemed against me. His hair was thinner, his frame leaner, and his eyes carried the gravity of a man who had walked through fire. He approached me after my keynote, waiting patiently as delegates surrounded me. When the crowd finally dispersed, he extended his hand. I hesitated only a moment before shaking it. His grip was firm but lacked the desperate edge I once knew. Daniel, he said softly, almost reverently. Or should I say, Nova's Daniel Barrett, the visionary. His attempt at humor fell flat, but his tone carried no malice. I started again, he continued before I could respond. Small-scale projects, local solutions. Renewable energy for rural areas, affordable tech for schools. Nothing glamorous, but honest. I studied him carefully. There was no arrogance, no facade, just a man stripped of illusions, finally learning humility. That sounds like something worth building, I said. His eyes softened with relief. It's not billions, but it's mine. And this time, no shortcuts. For the first time in decades, I felt the glimmer of the brother I had once admired. We spoke for hours that evening, not about rivalry or betrayal, but about ideas, about how technology could heal rather than exploit. When we parted, there was no promise of partnership, but there was something more valuable. Respect. Fragile, but real. Back home, Nova entered a new chapter. I stepped back from daily operations, allowing the next generation to lead, though I remained a guiding presence. It wasn't easy to let go. The company had been my shield, my sword, and my proof of worth. But watching younger innovators rise reminded me of why I had started this journey. To create, not to control. The years tempered me. My parents had, long since retreated into silence, their empire of pride dismantled. My mother reached out occasionally, letters filled with regret, and though I responded politely, the bond had frayed too deeply to fully mend. My father never spoke to me again, but Grandma Barrett remained my constant, the anchor who had seen my worth before anyone else. She passed away peacefully one spring evening, leaving behind a note in her will that read simply, "Daniel, remember that wealth is not what you store in banks, but what you plant in others. Her words echoed through me as I stood at her grave, the city skyline behind me, the hum of progress surrounding us. I realized then that my story, our story, wasn't about betrayal, revenge, or even victory. It was about resilience, about choosing honesty when deceit seemed easier, about finding strength in rejection and building something unshakable from the rubble of disappointment. Thomas attended the funeral. He stood apart from the crowd, his hands folded, his gaze lowered. After the service, he approached me quietly. "She believed in both of us," he murmured. I nodded. "She still does. In her way." For a moment, the years of rivalry melted, and we were simply two grandsons mourning the woman who had given us everything. As I grew older, I found myself less consumed by the scale of Nova's success and more moved by the stories of those it touched. A student in Kenya using our affordable devices to study medicine, a farmer in India doubling his yield thanks to our algorithms, a single mother in Detroit starting her business with our microloan platform. These were the legacies that mattered, the invisible threads that wove through lives I would never meet, yet somehow shaped. And so, when I finally recorded my last public message before retiring, I didn't speak of profits or patents. I spoke of integrity. I told the story of how betrayal nearly destroyed me, but truth saved me. I spoke of how shortcuts seduce but always collapse, and how the only real victory is to build something that lasts, not just in markets, but in people's hearts. If you've watched this far, I ask you to remember this. Success means little if it costs you your soul. What you build matters, but how you build it matters more. Let my story remind you that the hardest path, the honest path, is the only one that truly endures. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Your voice matters more than you know.